Hey everyone, welcome back to our podcast. Today's episode is all about the United States. Whether you're a local or listening from abroad, I'm sure this will be an insightful and fun conversation. With me, as always, is my co host, Alex. What's up, Alex?
Hey, Sarah, what's up, everyone? I'm super excited to dive into this topic. There's so much to discuss, from history and culture to politics and geography. The U.S. is such a complex place with so many layers, so I think this will be an interesting conversation.
Absolutely. I think the US is often perceived in certain ways depending on where you're from or what media you consume, but it's way more diverse than what we see on the surface. So, where do we start?
Let's start with the geography. The United States is enormous. I mean, when people outside the U.S. hear about road trips, they often don't realize how long these drives can actually be. From the East Coast to the West Coast, we're talking thousands of miles.
Totally. There's this popular misconception that you can drive across the country in a day. Not possible, people. You'd need days, if not weeks, depending on how much you stop. But one of the most fascinating things to me is how the geography changes as you travel.
Oh, for sure. You've got everything from deserts in the Southwest, lush forests in the Pacific Northwest, and mountains running down the Rockies. Then there's the Great Plains, which can seem endless when you're driving through them.
And let's not forget about the tropical vibe of Florida, with its beaches and wetlands, or Alaska, which is a whole different world with its glaciers, mountains, and wildlife. Every region has its own vibe and ecosystem. It's really a traveler's dream.
What I love about that is how the geography shapes the culture of the U.S. as well. Like, people in California are all about the beach and hiking culture. Compare that to somewhere like New York City, where life's more about the urban hustle.
Exactly. And then you've got places like Texas, which is its own thing entirely. There's a certain pride that comes with being from Texas. Same goes for Louisiana, with its strong French influence, particularly in New Orleans.
Yeah, Cajun and Creole cultures are so interesting. The blend of French, African, Spanish, and Native American influences in Louisiana really makes for a rich cultural experience, especially with the food and music.
Ugh, now you're making me crave some gumbo. Speaking of food, that's another thing about the US. The regional cuisines are so different. We can do an entire episode just on food. From Southern comfort food to New England clam chowder, there's so much variety.
Barbecue in Texas, deep dish pizza in Chicago, lobster rolls in Maine. I could go on forever. What's fascinating is how the food culture in the U.S. reflects its history of immigration. Waves of immigrants from Italy, Mexico, China, and so many other places have left their mark on the food landscape.
Right. The diversity in food is just one aspect of the larger story of immigration. America's known as the melting pot for a reason. Historically, people have come from all over the world to the US seeking opportunities, and they've brought their traditions with them, which is why the country is so culturally diverse.
That's a huge part of what makes the U.S. both fascinating and sometimes a bit complicated. It's a country built on immigration, but it's also had a lot of tension around immigration policies and who gets to claim an American identity.
That's a great point. Historically, there's been a lot of resistance to new groups of immigrants, even though the US is a nation built by immigrants. This goes way back to the Irish and Italians in the 19th century, and it's still a hot topic today, with debates about immigration from Latin America and other regions.
Totally. And that brings us to a broader discussion about American identity. What does it mean to be American? It's something that's constantly evolving, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The idea of being American used to be pretty narrowly defined, but over the centuries, it's become this complex and multifaceted identity. Different groups have brought their own traditions, languages, and perspectives, and those have all influenced what it means to be part of the U.S.
And let's not forget the Native American nations that were here long before European settlers arrived. Their cultures, histories, and rights are an important part of this conversation, too. They're often overlooked in mainstream narratives, but they're a crucial part of the fabric of the U.S.
That's a huge point. Native American cultures have been here for thousands of years, and their contributions and struggles are often marginalized in the broader story of America. It's really important to acknowledge that, especially when we're talking about the concept of American identity.
For sure. So let's pivot a bit to American history. When most people think of the U.S., they think of the Declaration of Independence in 1776, but the history goes way deeper than that, and it's full of contradictions. The country was founded on the ideals of liberty and freedom, but at the same time, it was also a nation built on slavery.
Yeah, that contradiction has always been part of America's story. The ideals of democracy and equality, while groundbreaking at the time, weren't extended to everyone. Women, Black people, Native Americans, and other minorities were excluded for a long time. Absolutely. I mean, the United States is vast, right? From coast to coast, it's like you're traveling through different countries sometimes. You've got everything from bustling cities like New York and Los Angeles to more laid back places like the Midwest or the Deep South. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of the US as a whole?
For me, it's diversity. And I'm not just talking about cultural diversity, though, that's huge. I'm also thinking about the geography, the climate, the food, everything. You could be skiing in Colorado one day, surfing in California the next, and then head to the desert in Arizona all within a week. That range of experiences is pretty unique. What about you?
Totally. And building on that, I think one of the things that fascinates me most about the US is the regionalism. Like, even within the same country, you have these areas with distinct identities and traditions. People in New England have different ways of speaking, eating, and celebrating compared to people in the South or the Pacific Northwest. It's almost like visiting different cultures without leaving the country. You ever feel that when you travel across the states?
Oh, for sure. I've had those moments where I'm like, wait, am I still in the US? It's wild. One of the most striking differences, I think, is the attitude toward life. Like people in big cities on the East Coast, New York, Boston, they're always on the go. It's like they're in this constant rush, super focused. But then you go down to the South, and it's the opposite. People are much more laid back, more into slowing things down and enjoying life.
Exactly. It's a really good point. And that kind of leads into how different the political landscape can be depending on where you are in the country. Like, the US is essentially a federation of 50 states, each with its own government, laws, and even cultural values. What flies in California might not fly in Texas, and vice versa. I think that's one of the things that makes the US really interesting, but also kind of complicated.
Yeah, and that's probably why it feels like there's a never ending debate about things like states' rights versus federal control. Like, how much freedom should each state have to set its own laws? It's kind of like this ongoing tug of war, and it really defines the political discourse in the US. A lot of people don't realize how much local politics can differ. Did you know that some states are almost like mini countries in terms of their budgets and populations?
Totally. Like California, for example. Its economy is massive. If California were a country, it'd be one of the largest economies in the world. And I think that's why you see these regions almost behaving like they have their own identity. It's more than just borders, it's about how the people think and what they prioritize. You brought up politics, and that's such a big piece. I mean, we can't talk about the US without diving into its political system, right?
Oh man, the political system is both fascinating and, let's be honest, kind of exhausting. So, for anyone who isn't super familiar with it, the US is a representative democracy with a federal system of government. You've got the three branches executive, legislative, and judicial working together to balance power. In theory, that whole system is designed to prevent any one branch from getting too powerful. But, as we've seen, it can get messy when different branches or levels of government, federal versus state, for example, clash on policies or issues. Plus, the two party system dominates US politics. which is kind of unique compared to other democracies that have multiple viable parties. What do you think of the two-party system, Sarah?
The two-party system is such a double-edged sword, right? On one hand, it simplifies things for voters because you usually end up with a pretty clear choice: Democrat or Republican. But on the flip side, it often feels like it's too limiting. There are so many people whose views don't fit neatly into one of those two categories, and it can make the whole process feel a bit rigid. Sometimes it even leads to this feeling of polarization, where it's either one side or the other, and there's very little room for compromise.
Yeah, exactly. Polarization is one of the biggest challenges right now. It's like people can't even agree on basic facts anymore. I think that's partly fueled by the media landscape in the US, where you've got news outlets catering to specific political ideologies. People are often living in these echo chambers, only hearing what they already believe, which makes it even harder to bridge the divide. Have you noticed how even things like science or public health get politicized?
Oh, definitely. I mean, just look at how something like wearing masks or getting vaccinated became a political issue during the pandemic. It's wild because those things should be based on science and public health, but they got swept up in this whole political narrative. And like you said, the media plays a big role in shaping how people see these issues. It's almost like there are two parallel realities sometimes, depending on which news you consume.
For sure, and it's interesting because the US prides itself on freedom of speech and a free press, which are foundational to democracy. But it's like with that freedom, there's also this responsibility to seek out reliable information, and that can be tricky when there's so much misinformation floating around. It's one of the things that makes navigating the political landscape in the US both fascinating and frustrating.
And speaking of navigating, that kind of brings us to geography, right? The way the US is laid out, with such different regions, plays into how people think and vote. I mean, think about the urban rural divide. People living in big cities often have completely different priorities from those in rural areas. It affects everything from infrastructure and education to healthcare and economic opportunities.
Yeah, the urban rural divide is huge. You can see it in the election results too. Urban areas tend to lean more liberal, while rural areas are often more conservative. And it's not just about politics, it's about how people experience life day to day. In a big city, you've got access to public transportation, hospitals, and universities. But in rural areas, it's more spread out. And people might be more reliant on industries like agriculture or manufacturing. That difference shapes everything from how people view government to what they expect from it.
Right. And that ties into education, too. The education system in the US is incredibly decentralized, with local governments playing a big role in how schools are run. That means what's taught and how it's taught can vary dramatically from state to state, or even district to district. And then you have these divides between public and private education, or between well funded and underfunded schools, which can really impact opportunity.
Exactly. And we've seen how education can become a battleground for different political ideologies, whether it's debates over history, curricula, sex education, or even the teaching of climate change. It's one of the reasons why education reform is such a hot topic, but also one of the hardest things to tackle. And don't even get me started on student loans and the cost of higher education in the US. That's a whole conversation in itself.
Oh, absolutely. The student debt crisis is massive, and it's not something you see in a lot of other countries to the same extent. Higher education in the US is so expensive, and it puts a lot of people in a difficult financial position before they've even started their careers. And there's this growing conversation around whether college is worth it for everyone, or whether we should be encouraging more vocational training or other paths.
Yeah, and that also taps into the broader question of the American dream. You know, the idea that anyone can make it here if they work hard enough. That's such a deeply ingrained part of the culture, but it's also been under a lot of scrutiny lately. People are asking whether the American dream is still attainable, especially with rising costs of living, income inequality, and economic mobility being harder for some groups.
It's true. The American dream has evolved so much over time. At one point, it was all about owning a home, having a stable job, and raising a family. But now, I think people are redefining it. For some, it's not necessarily about owning a house with a white picket fence. It's more about finding financial stability, pursuing creative passions, or even just having the freedom to live life on your own terms. But, as you said, rising costs and inequality make it harder for certain groups to achieve even the basics of that dream.
Exactly. And the economic landscape plays such a huge role in that. The US has one of the largest economies in the world, but that doesn't mean everyone is benefiting equally. You've got massive tech companies making billions, but then you've got people working multiple jobs just to make ends meet. It really brings up questions about how wealth is distributed and what kind of economic policies are needed to create more balance.
Yeah, and I think that ties back to the political conversations we were having earlier. People are really divided on how to fix these issues. Some want more government intervention to create social safety nets, while others argue that free market policies are the key to growth. And it's not just a theoretical debate. People's lives are directly impacted by these policies.
Totally. And we can't forget how the US interacts with the rest of the world either. As much as we're focused on domestic issues, the US plays a huge role on the global stage. Its foreign policy, military presence, and economic influence ripple across the world. And that's another area where the country's politics come into play. Different administrations have vastly different approaches to international relations, which can shift global dynamics pretty quickly.
Yeah, the US definitely has a unique position globally. It's a leader in so many ways: military, economic, cultural. But with that comes a lot of responsibility. And sometimes it feels like the US struggles to balance its domestic needs with its global commitments. There's always that tension between being a global leader and focusing on internal issues.
Right, and that balance can shift depending on who's in office. Some presidents have focused more on diplomacy and building international coalitions, while others have taken a more isolationist or unilateral approach. It really depends on the administration, and that can lead to some pretty dramatic shifts in foreign policy every few years.
Yeah, it's interesting how foreign policy can change so much from one administration to the next. And the world notices too. Allies and rivals alike are constantly adapting to the US's changing strategies. It makes me think about the impact of things like trade agreements, military alliances, and even environmental policies. The US has such an outsized influence in these areas.
Exactly. And speaking of environmental policies, that's another huge topic. The US has a complicated relationship with environmental issues. On one hand, it's a leader in technological innovation, but on the other, it's also one of the largest carbon emitters. The debate over how to address climate change is so polarized here, and it's really becoming a defining issue for younger generations.
Yeah, climate change is definitely one of the biggest challenges the US is facing right now. And it's not just about government policy, it's also about how companies, individuals, and even local governments are stepping up. You see cities and states leading the charge on sustainability when the federal government stalls. It's like this grassroots movement is happening from the ground up.
For sure, you've got states like California setting their own ambitious climate goals, even when federal policies lag behind. And businesses are also getting involved, whether it's through green energy initiatives or sustainable practices. It's one of those issues where people are realizing that change can't wait, and they're taking matters into their own hands, regardless of what's happening at the federal level.
Yeah, it's encouraging to see that kind of leadership coming from different levels. But at the same time, the scale of the problem is so massive that it feels like we need everyone: government, businesses, individuals to work together to make a real impact. And that's a tough challenge in a country as diverse and divided as the US.
Absolutely. The US is in this constant state of evolution, and I think that's what makes it such a fascinating place to study and live in. Whether we're talking about politics, culture, or the environment, Everything feels interconnected. It's like the country is always in this balancing act, trying to figure out how to move forward while grappling with its past and present.
Well said. It's definitely a work in progress. And with that, I think we've only scratched the surface today. The US is such a rich and complex topic. There's always more to explore, and I'm sure we'll be revisiting it in future episodes.
Totally. Whether you're a history buff, a politics junkie, or just curious about how the US fits into the broader world, there's always something new to learn. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. As always, feel free to reach out with your thoughts and questions. We love hearing from you.
Wait, before we completely wrap things up, Alex, I was just thinking we should give our listeners a little sneak peek into what's coming up next. We've covered so much about the US today: politics, culture, geography, but there's still so much more we could dive into in future episodes. What are you thinking we should explore next?
Oh, good call, Sarah. Yeah, we've got plenty left to talk about. I was thinking we could dedicate an episode to American pop culture, music, movies, fashion, and how the US has influenced global trends. It's crazy how much of the world watches American films or listens to American artists. What do you think?
I love that idea. The cultural impact of the US globally is huge. We could look at the golden age of Hollywood, the rise of streaming platforms like Netflix, and how American music genres like jazz, rock, and hip hop have shaped the soundtracks of countries around the world. Plus, how American fashion brands have created global trends. There's just so much to dig into there.
For sure. And while we're at it, we could even tie in sports. You know, how sports like basketball and American football have this massive presence in the US, but also how they're slowly gaining traction globally. I mean, the NBA is huge overseas now, and even American football is starting to see international games. We could do a deep dive into that world too.
Oh, definitely. Sports would be a fun one. And we can't forget about American cuisine either. How food has been influenced by so many different cultures coming together. I think people would love to hear about the regional specialties like New York pizza, Southern barbecue, Tex Mex, and even how fast food chains have become global phenomena.
That's a great point. The food in the US is so eclectic because it's a melting pot of different cultures. You can find just about every type of cuisine here, and yet, certain dishes have become quintessentially American. That would make for a delicious episode.
Definitely. And we could also touch on how these cultural exports, music, films, food, and sports, are received differently around the world. Like, why do certain American trends blow up in some places but not in others? I think that cross cultural influence is fascinating, and it shows how interconnected the world is becoming.
Absolutely. And speaking of interconnectedness, maybe down the line we could even explore US relations with other countries in more depth, like the special relationship with the UK, the complicated ties with China, or how the US is perceived across different regions, from Europe to Latin America to the Middle East. It could be cool to break those down one by one.
Yes, that's such a good point. And I think a lot of people would be interested in hearing more about how America's image shifts depending on where you are. It's one thing to look at US domestic politics, but understanding how the rest of the world views America is just as important.
Definitely. We could even invite some international guests or experts to get their perspective on it. That would give us some really unique insights that we don't always hear in US centric media.
I love it. International voices would add a lot to the conversation. All right, I think we got our next few episodes lined up then. I'm excited.
Me too. This is going to be a fun series to explore. All right, now I guess we really do have to wrap it up for today. But I hope you all are as excited as we are for what's coming next.
Yes, for real, this time, we're signing off. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. We always appreciate your support and love getting your feedback. If there's something specific you'd like us to cover about the US or anything else, don't hesitate to reach out. We love hearing your ideas.